Salutations from the Nintendo Archive. As you know, I am your host, Holden. Hope everyone listening is having a wonderful day. I would tell you what episode this is, but I don't actually know yet as of this recording, so it's just a mystery for everybody. It's a secret to everyone for the time being until you see the episode title when it comes out. So, whatever. This is a special episode, though, as I have a special guest. Once more, Steven from Level 1 Sword has graced this humble show with his presence. To any new listeners, or to those who were not privy to the episodes where Steven was a guest, his show, Level 1 Sword, is a video game-centric podcast specializing in industry news on a bi-weekly cycle. Very informative, very concise, and all delivered with Steven's signature serrated edge commentary that keeps things real. Needless to say, I recommend it highly. Steven also hosts the Level 1 Sword YouTube show where he tackles a number of subjects. For instance, he has released a number of videos concerning the life and evolution of handheld systems. A series probably spanning a dozen or more videos. All very enjoyable, informative, and arduous in detail. It's good stuff all around. All that said, hello, Steven.
Hi. I like the serrated edge. I guess the Level 1 sword, the actual blade, is a serrated edge of sorts when it comes to the podcast.
Didn't even think about it on that level. That's serendipitous. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it's I would say that it's not negative as a show, but it definitely, keeps it real. It's a good, honest appraisal of all the news and stuff that the industry giants are doing. So it's good that it's got that edge, certainly.
Yeah, and it has changed. I used to try to cover as many topics as possible, and I was even thinking just earlier today, I'm thinking, it's not really a news-focused podcast. It's definitely more kind of like an op-ed, kind of almost like a letter to the editors section where I rant a lot about things. It's all video game related, of course, but when Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft, Steam, anyone, or I should say Valve rather, any of these major developers do something that irks me or something, there have also been times, although it's rarer, when I'm really jazzed up about something. Like I feel like it's a great outlet for me to get my very Italian and Irish roots out there into commentary about what is going on. So I don't really cover a huge gamut when it comes to industry news, and you probably wouldn't want me to because it would come across as very dry and boring, and I wouldn't want to listen to it either. So yeah, that's kind of how the podcast goes on there. And you've actually been a guest on there a few times yourself.
Yes, that's true. I have. And it's been very enjoyable. It definitely runs a little longer when I'm on, certainly. Not as concise, but it's been enjoyable being on there, certainly.
Yeah, always good for a change up every so often. And as I'm sure today will be.
Oh, yes, for sure. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to today's show. So, Steven, if we, anything else to mention before we just get right into our topics?
Oh, I am ready to jump in.
Perfect. So, for this first topic, I was thinking to myself, with the state of affairs in our world, with, people being accosted on stage at the Oscars, war between Russia and Ukraine, and also hot button political issues coming to the surface once more this late spring and early summer. I've realized something, or maybe I've always known it, but civility and balanced discussion, these things they're all passé. Everyone's over it. What we really need in society is blood in the water. That's what we need. That's what's important. So, in the spirit of, drawing the sharks, I decided that Steven, he's an agreeable enough guy, but let's peel that back and from you, Steven, I want a very unpopular opinion. And I will be providing one myself, but in good conscience, I'm going to let you go first. I really want an opinion from you that will, get the mob after you. Does that sound fun?
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably not going to, irritate as many people as you might think, because I really feel like gamers fit into, you're either more retro focused or more modern focused. And I think one of the groups here will definitely be with me, and the other group will be like, they might get the knives out. But as someone who has been playing games for, I've been playing games for over 3 decades now. I've seen a lot. I was playing on the original NES when I started, and I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen the industry go from 2D to 3D. I've seen standard definition give way to high definition, and now we're in 4K. I really think, and this is someone who does appreciate frame rate, I do think higher frame rates are extremely overrated. I really think that. I keep hearing people, even people that have hardware and screens that can do 120 FPS, the jump from 60 frames per second to 120 frames per second is not as big, which is strange, but it's not as big of a leap from 30 frames per second to 60.
I disagree. No, go on. Yeah.
So, yeah, and by the way, if I have the ability, of course, to play something at 30 or 60, I'm going to pick 60. Like, of course I want as many frames as I can get. But it's not a hill for me to die on. I hear, as a listener of other people's podcasts, and I don't know if you want me mentioning names, I absolutely will if you want me to, but if not, we can just keep this very, under wraps.
In the spirit of blood in the water, why not?
Okay. All right. Yeah, so there's a podcast called Sacred Symbols. It's a PlayStation-centric podcast, and it's run by Colin Moriarty, who used to work for IGN and, got big over there before leaving. He runs the podcast with a couple other guys. One of them is Chris Raygun. And Chris Raygun has said before that when it comes to frame rates, he, quote, can't go back to 30 frames per second. And I'm just kind of like, I'm facepalming a little bit, because even these recent consoles, the PS5, the Series X, they do have games that cannot hit 60. I think Elden Ring cannot hit 60 on those systems. Or if they do, it's very rare, and they dip down into the 40s very frequently, if not high 30s.
What about Forbidden West? Wasn't there like an either-or situation with that one?
Yeah. And yeah, actually, typically, which was strange because Forbidden West doesn't even have a ray tracing mode, and I figured if you're going to do ray tracing, or if you're going to do 30 frames per second, that would, give you the overhead to push ray tracing, but it doesn't even do that. Anyway, I would, if I had one, and if I have the option to do a performance mode, I think the original, well, not the original, but the reboot of God of War on PS4, if you have a PS4 Pro or higher, you can choose between a higher frame rate or 30 with higher visual fidelity, that kind of thing. And I of course notice frame rate more than, there's a couple more plants on the ground. But even having said that, like, I can't get behind the whole, if it's not running at 60, I don't want anything to do with it. Or if it's locked to 30, I don't want anything to do with it. And the really interesting thing about this topic is, for the longest time, no one noticed that The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on N64, and really on all releases of the original version, not the 3DS version, But on that original version that you can now play on Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, it's locked to 20 frames per second.
I don't know if that sounds right. I'm gonna have to. We're gonna have to go to the.
It's definitely sub 30. Super Mario 64 runs at 30, and you can tell the difference between these two games. One is definitely running at a higher frame rate, with Mario being that one, but.
And the other one can jump too. So.
At will, yes.
Ha-ha.
Yes, very true. Backflips and side flips, oh my. But, and it's funny because these two games, like, they share the same engine. Ocarina of Time was going to be very similar to Super Mario 64. So it is interesting to me that, I guess, to get the larger environments and the more open world aspect, that they decided the trade-off was worth it. But it kind of, I don't know, I've never had a hard time, even though I've noticed the lower frame rate on the game, it doesn't feel like the game is chugging. And I think it is because it runs consistently at 20 or whatever frame rate it is running at.
What's that buzzword? Frame pacing?
Frame pacing, yeah. If you watch any Digital Foundry videos, you'll hear that a lot, especially if there's issues with it. But no, I don't have problems going back to games that run at 30 or even sub 30 frames per second. To me, it is just a part of the experience. Just like, if you're going to play a Game Boy game, you set the expectations that you're not going to be seeing a full color palette in front of you. You just have those expectations. So
I myself don't, and I get mad every time, but I'm learning. Next time, it'll go better, I'm hoping, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, expectations are a funny thing like that.
So yeah. That's the end of mine.
Well, I will say that, while you all make good points, you ever think maybe you don't appreciate higher frame rates because you're not really a true gamer and, you're just not on that esports league? And
yeah, I've been lying to myself for 3 decades now, and, I'm just a poser.
Kind of a fair weather gamer, yeah.
I could just be getting old and tired of the graphical arms race. That could also be a thing too.
Yeah. No, yeah, good stuff. I mean, I would say I'm generally in agreement with that. I was playing a game. They had like a high color mode, and then they had like just the standard mode, which the high color mode, this was an N64 game. If you couldn't guess from that sort of terminology. And I think I put it on the high color mode. It looked slightly better. And then I had to turn it off because the helicopter I was trying to shoot down was just too choppy, and I literally couldn't play it, and it took me kind of way too long to realize that was the issue. So I don't know, I think I'm just frame rate blind. That's probably to a fault. I mean, I can notice, but it just fades into the background pretty quick. But yes, thank you for that. Let's hope you get an open casket funeral. Hey,
I expect a full Viking send off with the fire arrows raining down on my corpse floating out over the water.
Oh, okay. Well,
no less.
I don't have that kind of a funeral home deposit, but good on you. So for my unpopular opinion, I have so many. So many. I was considering one, but then I'm like, okay, we'd be here an hour if I went with that one. But this unpopular opinion, well, actually, maybe we'll tie into the show later on, just for reasons. And that concerns the developer Rare, or Rareware, whatever they're called. I never know. Stamper Brothers, Inc. Yeah, Rare. Everybody knows Rare. Donkey Kong Country, Banjo-Kazooie, yada, yada, yada. So people, they really, really like this developer. And I don't think anything I have to say about them is going to be terribly scathing, which in a weird way I think is going to make this unpopular opinion even worse to hear because it's done with kind of a attitude. Oh, it's really going to make it cut. But Rare, in my opinion, I haven't played all their games, but I've played a lot more than I did prior. I think they are a slightly overrated developer. I just, Banjo-Kazooie's, it's a pretty great game. Diddy Kong Racing, not a hidden gem, by the way. That's when you sell 5 million copies, you're not a hidden gem, but also a great game. But other things that they've done, like, I suppose this is like my perception of other people's perception, so it's kind of a weird matrix. Because prior to this, I'd only really played the Donkey Kong Country trilogy. But, it seemed like people had a lot of love for their games in the N64 days. Like they were Nintendo's right-hand man, which, in all fairness, they essentially were their biggest second-party contributor. However, while they did make a lot of games, I feel like half of them, in very serious ways, kind of suck. I reviewed. I did a review for GoldenEye, and GoldenEye, I would say, is overall pretty good, all things considered. Generally an enjoyable game, but like I mentioned, that there are some things in like basic level design that they just did not get right. Basic encounter design that was just seemed like they overlooked a lot of things. And then when I played Perfect Dark, it's like they doubled down on all these terrible ideas they had. There's a level, I don't know if you played Perfect Dark, Steven.
I have not. So
you're not really a shooter guy, if I'm understanding, or first person shooter specifically.
Correct.
But in that game, there's a level, the final level, you can fail the mission if you run out of ammo on a grenade launcher. And there's no checkpoints in these levels. And the grenade launcher, they're like, oh, you failed the mission, now you can't destroy the thingamajig without it. And I'm like, you can destroy that thingamajig with your basic pistol, so why did they program that in? There's also this part in that same level where they make you climb, like, across a wall that has no like adhesive hint to it, like there's no vines or anything like Ocarina. It's just like, oh, you can climb this wall. I'm like, that's not a mechanic anywhere in this game.
Wow.
Like just stuff like that, like unforgivable things where you're just like, there's no reason for the game to be, there's no reason for that to be in the game other than the game hates you and it really wanted to be 20 hours long. That's my view on it. And a lot of their games kind of do that. There's a game called Jet Force Gemini. And that is a game that has the potential to be a very good 10-hour game. And then, as I was playing it, little distant memories from reviews started flooding back to me. I'm like, oh, isn't there like something stupid they want you to do in this game? And I could see the hints in the game, so I mean, I kind of knew what I was walking into, but since I want to review it, I kept going. And they take a 10-hour game and they stretch it into like a 30-hour experience through the bad kind of Metroid elements, we'll call them. It's like, oh, well, you can't get here now, but you'll get here later when we decide you can. Like, great, love it, 10 out of 10. And there could be other games still that I could talk about, but DK64, for instance. I had high hopes for that game, and I'll get into a little more later on that some other time, but that game's gameplay loop is about the equivalent of that toddler peg and hole game, with like, you have a star-shaped little peg, and you put it in the star-shaped hole, that famous one. Someone could argue that's me being reductive in my reasoning, but only a little bit. Only a little bit, because really it's just find an icon that has a certain Kong's face on it, and then take that Kong over there, and maybe you get a crappy second-rate mini game, and you play it, and that's how it goes. So yeah, Rare Sometimes people go retro versus rare, because sometimes there's a comparison. Retro studios, that is. And, at this rate, I'd definitely take retro, even though they've only done like 5 games. Yeah, overall, Rare, they've done some very good games. They've done some quite great games. But they're a mixed bag in quality, and I don't think they've ever done a game that is truly exceptional either. I mean, Banjo-Kazooie comes pretty close, but I don't know. So, people love them, and it's not like they're a bad developer. Maybe Nintendo should have bought them, but it's definitely some questionable and overt design errors in their games that I don't hear talked about. Especially, Perfect Dark has a 97 on Metacritic when it came out, which to me is absurd. That game has such mean-spirited design elements in it. I don't know. People who were reviewing games, they must have been looking for specific things to give points to at that time. Yeah, I suppose that's really where I'd end my grievance. Yeah, Rareware. Yeah, they're good, but they're definitely not Nintendo. That's for sure. Like maybe I was led to believe during the N64 era.
Yeah, I honestly think Rare did their best work in the 16-bit generation. I've heard some people go so far as to blame Donkey Kong 64 for the death of 3D platformers for a while. Even though we saw those, coming into the 6th gen, like Jak and Daxter, Spyro still had some games coming out, so I wouldn't go...
Mario Sunshine.
Yes.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Not the best work there, but there still were, there were still games coming out in that, and then, shortly after, interest died off, but I was never really impressed with a lot of their original stuff. I've never been a fan of Banjo and Kazooie, despite the fact that I really do enjoy 3D platformers and especially collectathons too. Like I love Spyro, I love Jak and Daxter, I love Super Mario 64 and the other sandbox games, but I just couldn't get behind. Like the music drove me insane. I think it was just, I was a little bit too old for it when it came out. I was about, I was in my, I think I was either a preteen or just barely a teenager when that came out. So I was just not impressed with that. To me, Killer Instinct always just looked like these are, you got a fire guy, you got an ice guy, you got a guy with a mohawk, you got a robot guy. It just was kind of like, these are all just fighting game tropes at this point. Whereas Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, which Killer Instinct was trying to compete against, it was like, well, they have their own distinct flavor. Like Street Fighter actually is like, doing this like world warrior thing and kind of going with different cultures. Mortal Kombat is just going completely like in the whole Doom direction with trying to make things as gory as possible. And aside from the combo system in Killer Instinct, just those character designs, they just screamed generic at me, and I could never really get over that. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Rare, they're good. They have done some amazing things with games like Donkey Kong Country is probably my favorite platformer on the Super Nintendo. But when it comes to their other stuff, I'm not that big of a fan.
Well, I'm glad you decided that you wanted to carry another cross up to your place of doom. I'll just go home now.
We'll go together.
Yeah, yeah. It was always, to me, it just seemed that people thought, it just sounded like they were like as good as Nintendo, and I do not think so. I think their strong suit is they make very good looking games, first and foremost, typically. But the gameplay elements of it, not always there, or polish elements, not there either. But yeah, Rareware, bless them, they're doing Sea of Thieves now and such, and that seems to have been kind of a what I don't know, has caught on slowly but surely.
Yeah.
But yes, that's so. There we go. Now that we've endeared ourselves to any current and potential and future audience people, let's go on to our next topic. I had fun with that. I hope you did too.
Yeah, that was fine. I love being honest and come what may, be honest.
Yeah, it's fun. Okay, so for this next segment, we have a bog standard what we've been playing. I'm sure anyone who's listened to a podcast is very familiar with this kind of segment. So familiar, I'm not even going to explain it. So, Steven, have you been playing anything interesting? And if you have, do you want to talk about it first? Or do you want me to do my stuff first?
Yeah, let me actually hand it off to you first.
Okay, perfect. So, I really haven't been playing much, honestly, in the past little bit here, outside of N64 games, which I will be talking about in their due time. However, in maybe 2 years' time, I think I've been playing retro games for maybe 2 years now. I've actually taken a break from that, and I played a somewhat modern game. 2019's modern enough, I figure, certainly. And so the game I was playing was Jedi or Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Name trips me up. And I'm playing it on the Xbox One, a launch Xbox One, which is important, and I'll get into that in a minute. I guess I bought this game on sale after I was watching the Obi-Wan stuff. I really got kind of into that into that world again, and I would say there's a fair amount of crossover between the Obi-Wan show and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. But the game, it's been very enjoyable. I think at the time it came out, I actually thought its reviews were a little more tepid than they ought to have been. Like an 80 or so on Metacritic, which is not the end of the world for me. I'm just kind of surprised. I feel like any game that's modestly good ends up in the 90 camp pretty easily. But this one, yeah, it didn't blow people out of the water, but I think it's become very popular over the years, and I can see why. It's very enjoyable. It borrows a lot of like assets and concept art from the movie Rogue One very clearly. That's one thing about it. Otherwise, in terms of a game, it reminds me of a lot of different games, but only at a distance, only vaguely. There's an element of Dark Souls in there where if you get killed by an enemy, you have to tag them to get your XP back. So that's a funny thing. And more importantly than that, when I play it, I really get a strong Metroid Prime vibe out of it. It's not like one-to-one. In fact, I kind of hate heedless comparisons for no reason. But when I look at it, I'm like, it seems like there's one or two developers on this team must have been on that Retro Studios team, potentially, because when I started it up, I was kind of expecting a fairly linear experience with some nooks for exploration, and that'd be about kind of it'd be some token side content. And early on in the game, it feels like it might be that. But then it just opens up, and there's lots of shortcuts to keep everything moving at a quick pace. But it is really, the levels in the game, there's only like 4 or 5 of them, really. And they're really large. Kind of like a biome in Metroid Prime. And there's Metroid elements where you kind of have keys and locks, and sometimes you don't have the key for the lock and you have to go away and you'll come back later, and the story will guide you as to when you need to do that. I don't know about you, Steven, but I'm always kind of weary of Metroid elements for no purpose, or not for like it's always a question of whether or not they help.
There's
I don't know.
There's a balance when it comes to, I think what you're getting here is talking about backtracking and how
backtracking,
and Metroid
track backing, yes.
Metroid does it in a way where it doesn't, it kind of tricks you into thinking, I'm not backtracking, I'm just going to get this item over here. I don't know how it does it, but it does it in a way where you're not really thinking about what it is you're doing. But if it happens in almost any other game, you're just like, this is so obnoxious. This is obviously just padding, and you're just trying to make the game longer, and you're dragging it out. But Metroid always has been there. Now, of course, there are some Metroid games that there's barely any backtracking. I think Metroid Fusion is pretty well known for being quite linear in that you don't really go through a whole lot of the same areas more than once. But yeah, there are, like, I definitely heard about this with Jedi Fallen Order, where to me you've got one too many subtitles there. But be that as it may, this was an EA game, wasn't it?
Yes, done by their Respawn team.
Yeah,
who did Titanfall.
And it's so strange to me that this game came out at the tail end of EA's exclusivity deal for Star Wars games. It's like, this is a good game, and you waited until you've already ruined the relationship that you had with Disney on this.
Did that expire?
It has expired now. At the time, and at the time this came out, I mean, while it was being developed, they didn't know that Disney wasn't going to release, or wasn't going to renew, rather, that contract with them. But they already knew they had some major turds like Battlefront 1, Battlefront 2, and just games that didn't hit with a splash. I think they did like they did Squadrons, which was kind of a callback to Road Squadron, but I've literally run into no person who has ever played that game.
I saw it for $10, and I'm like,
ooh,
it would probably be enjoyable at that price.
That tells you a lot,
maybe.
right there, when it's a $10 game.
I don't know when or like it was like 13 or something. 10. I'm rounding down, but yeah. So
came out around the same time, I want to say, as Fallen Order.
Yeah, around there, or maybe a little after. Like Fallen Orders, to kind of continue on, like I'd say the Metroid elements, like the game's pretty respectable of your time, so it's kind of neither here nor there.
That's always good.
It's like, it's always an element of like, oh, I don't know if you need to do that. Like they kind of take you somewhere, and when they stop you, they like give you something meaningful before they do it. It's like, oh, hey, go to this miserable planet that's like really hard, and like kind of a, well, I'll finish this thought before I get into that thought. But then you get a double lightsaber, and you're like, ooh, yeah, okay. I feel like these are a bad idea in practice, but whatever. These are Jedi. Yeah. I'm sure they can handle themselves.
I think if you do the Metroid thing and kind of do the whole drip feed upgrades and make it feel like you are progressing, because you are progressing with your character, even though it doesn't feel like you're progressing in the stage. So I think maybe that's probably the hook that these types of games need to go with.
That would be a concise way of putting how this game does it. But beyond, like, I don't know if you ever listened to the Go Nintendo podcast. I'm not going to get into them. I enjoy listening to them because they're kind of childhood friends who have a repertoire, but they also like Nintendos. It's like a virtual hangout you're kind of just listening in on friends. But that guy, anyway, he was talking about how the game felt PS2 era in kind of a good way. I think he meant it as a compliment, in that it just feels, I don't know, like, I guess like if it has like a very basic combat where you unlock seemingly kind of basic combos, but the combat really is the game's strength. And it just feels really good to counter somebody with a lightsaber. You don't auto kill them like in Assassin's Creed, and frankly, games like Batman, the Arkham series, kind of popularized a very synchronized fighting system where there's kind of a rhythm to it. But this game, it's just like, you could, if you pick a fight with a bunch of people, they'll just clobber you. They don't take turns. I'm like, and it's like feels very.
It's like the opposite of what they did with Force Unleashed, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, that game's on sale too. I've been looking at that. Maybe I'll have to pick that up to compare. I don't really remember that game all too much. But it is definitely different from that one, where that game is kind of a. Well, they're both definitely very cinematic, but Force Unleashed was like a very quick time event, heavy, sort of lots of production level up front. But yeah, just there wasn't a lot of like just player centric decision making, I guess. And in this one, it does kind of seem like, yeah, like you can just get into trouble and get killed really easily. Like they introduced you to a planet where it's just isn't designed to be a pleasant experience. Like you have, so people hate water. They hate water in games mechanically, but they also hate poison. It's like, this is like a poisonous planet where everything explodes in a poison thing after you kill it. Or if the big guy hits you with the first one, he'll go into a combo and hit you with 3 more and you'll immediately die. And I'm like, yeah, this is old school in a way. But the combat it's the perfect balance of, it probably doesn't want you to be here, but if you're stubborn and stupid, then you're gonna go for it anyway. What's the famous line from the prequel trilogy? You underestimate my power. You know, I'm kind of doing that, and it proceeds to the
chop
same
all
result.
your limbs off.
Murdered and dead.
Famous last words.
Not supposed to fight this toad, but I am going to do it anyway.
Yeah, isn't there like a toad-looking like creature? Very like you can fight that thing first, but you're not supposed to.
Yeah. And it's actually like there's these pits you can accidentally fall into, and I had no such excuse. I was going in the long way. I didn't have to be there at all. But I'm not gonna have that toad underestimate me. But it's that kind of game. Yeah, the combat it's a very basic combo system, but if you get the feel right, it feels really good. Like deflecting lasers is you time the block in a way and you just knock them right back. And man, that felt good. Especially when they're 2 feet away, because they just could have just chopped you. But I've been enjoying it for that. I will say that playing it on a launch Xbox One, I thought this was supposed to be kind of an intermediary game for like both systems, Series X and whatever you want to call the 8th gen, the Xbox One.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if I had an Xbox One S, it would be a little better, but when you're fighting a toad and dying 10 times, yeah, those loading screens are going to be a bit rough. Which is fine. I'm like, I know what I'm doing. This is on me.
Going to make your next attempt really count.
Yeah, basically. But when I got to one planet, which has like a lot of foliage, famous Kashyyyk, there was times where the game would just start loading in game. It's just like, oh no, we can't do this.
Oh, like a stutter load.
Yeah, stutter load. And then there was other times where I thought maybe the guys I was fighting were telekinetic because their like clubs were floating with them, and I'm like, oh no, wait, their animations just haven't caught up to them, so their models are coming in, and I'm like, oh wow. Honestly, if you told me it was like a Switch port of the game in terms of like quality, I would believe you. But the Xbox One, it's definitely more powerful than the Switch.
Yeah, but that being said, the launch Xbox One is probably the worst way to play that game.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it, but it's if you like every time you pan the camera, it's like the frame stutter. It's like, oh, we have to render. Well, not a stutter, but it's just like the frame rate kind of hiccups. And that one particular forest planet, though, it's like getting to the point where I'm like, I'm sure they tried, but like this console cannot handle this game. Which again, I always thought it was sort of not really pushing anything for the Series X, and it probably isn't, but I've watched my brother start up playing it with all his quick resumes and stuff, and it's like, yeah, I mean, these intermediate steps are not necessarily exciting, but there is a difference, certainly. Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
I haven't beaten it yet. I've enjoyed it. Like, it's probably the best Star Wars game that came out since the last best Star Wars game came out. Whenever that was, I'm not sure.
I can't argue with you there.
And then, in short spurts, I've also been playing. I really don't have much to say about this game because maybe I've only played it for 2 hours. I've been playing. Keep wanting to say gold and silver. I've been playing Pokemon Red and Blue. I was tempted by Yellow because they're all on the 3DS, and this is what I'm playing it on. But I figured, it'd be more pure and original to go with Red and Blue. And so I bought Blue. Not really sure what the differences are. I know it's not too many, but I went with Blue because I felt like Red was the obvious choice. And I'm not a turn-based RPG kind of guy. I think there's sort of a way to enjoy those games that comes with, like, being steeped in that kind of gameplay. That's more your element, right, Steven? If I understand, like, you're more into the turn-based RPGs.
Yeah, and that's actually the first one that I played was Pokemon Red.
So you're pretty much over the game. You don't much care for it. No strong feelings about it one way or the other. Okay.
I love Gen 1 Pokemon. I really do.
I'm definitely not there myself, but I've been very surprised at... I kind of like the weird no high stakes vibe of it so far. Like they say some pretty silly things like, now go become a Pokemon master or something like heady like that. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm like 10, but sure. Sure, Professor. I don't know.
Go explore the world, why don't you?
I have a curfew, but okay. But even with that out of the way, it feels pretty low stakes, just wandering around in the grass. And I've heard people really dislike grass in Pokemon games because of random encounters, but I've just been trolling it. Just trolling through the grass, and which is, that's how you catch Pokemon, and I've enjoyed that. I don't know all the names of the cities. I've seen the first gym. I'm like, I'm not going to go in there yet. This is a late 90s RPG. I'm not sure they want me to go in there. I have like maybe 8 Pokemon. One of them's like a Metapod, and I don't even know if he has an attack. He like hardens.
Who's your starter?
I went with... I got Blue, and then I went with Charmander anyway. So, there you go. I backed out. I'm like, oh, well, let's go with Charmander.
Charmander's basically hard mode because that first gym is rock type, and unless you go with Bulbasaur or Squirtle, you're going to have a hard time. So get everyone to level 10, you'll be fine.
Okay, he's at level 13, but only him. I think I have... Like, it's funny, because I'm thinking that, like... In the spirit of old games, it's not like every option in the game is legitimate, I guess. Like, it's like there are some Pokemon I'm like, I don't think they really want you to use these. I think they just want you to collect them. Like, I'm like, I don't know how far I'm going to get with this Pidgey, but like, a bird's cool. I'd like it more than a Rattata. So far.
Well, and then you've got, you have the hidden machines, which are basically just these skills which are more important for using outside of battle to progress through the world. and they are locked to certain Pokemon, so they kind of force you to, like, you have an ability called Fly, where you can fly to any city you've already been to. So you're going to want a flying Pokemon with you, but you also want one that can fight. So, you know.
Yeah. I forget the word, like the fan word used for that. Like, I think there's some fuss about that earlier on. Like, people wanted them removed or something.
Like progress gating or something like that.
Yeah. Like, they were just... People just had certain Pokemon that they were, like, transportation-based, and they weren't... That's what their function was.
And nothing else.
And so you're eating up a slot, which, you know, I mean, like, how much of an effect that has is... I don't know. I couldn't say I'm a child. I am a child in the Pokemon world as it stands. There's a little part of me, I'm like, am I doing a Nuzlocke? I'm like, I don't know yet. We'll see how this goes. But I've been being very careful. I'm not even sure like how plausible it is to do that, but I really haven't gone far. But I kind of just think all the music hits.
Yeah.
Game Boy sound hardware. There's something about it. NES is hit and miss with me, but Game Boy, I like that sound chip, whatever it is.
Well, that and the compositions for Pokemon are always solid, I think. Everything has kind of this semi-serious but also whimsical vibe to it that just fits the game like a glove. So I remember like actually back when I had dial-up internet, I would just scour the internet for MIDIs, if you know what a MIDI is. It's what we had before MP3s, but they were basically these sound files that would use your computer's sound card when computers needed sound cards for sound, and it would basically just be this programmed way to use whatever instruments your sound card could reproduce. And so you would play MIDIs that you could play over dial-up, and I would just look for different Pokemon renditions because I really enjoyed that soundtrack.
Like maybe, I don't think you're too much older than me, but maybe I just hadn't caught up to the internet by that time. I don't know. Something about my upbringing.
I am definitely dating myself. I'm outing myself with this stuff.
But like that sounds like a audio equivalent of like the Magnavox Odyssey hardware where it used the TV display to make a game. It was
definitely late 90s stuff.
Love late 90s internet. Love speculative late 90s movies about the internet.
Oh,
even
goodness.
More importantly, that's a genre to itself. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the Pokemon I'm familiar, the Pokemon soundtrack I'm familiar with through Smash Brothers, first and foremost, and yeah, all their music is good. But just like sort of the low stakes music is good. I'm like, oh, this is all hitting, and so. There's always a point where I start a turn-based RPG and I'm like, I'm bored. I'm bored. I'm like, oh, I'm like actually kind of having a nice time. I'm still bored, but I'm kind of having a nice time now, which is, I don't know when that snuck up on me, but it happened. But that's really all I'd have to say about Pokemon Red and Blue. Bought Blue, went with Charmander anyway. So
makes all the sense in the world.
That's what I have been playing. Have you been playing anything, Stephen?
Yes, I have. Wanted to talk about a few games. What I'm currently playing now, and I'm almost done, kind of getting everything that I want out of this game that I want to get out of it, is Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. It keeps pulling me back in because they keep releasing DLC for it. 2 waves of DLC. I'm on the second one, and I'm just trying to get the last character that they gave us, their weapon completely maxed out. And it takes quite a bit of grinding to do, and lately I haven't had a whole lot of time to sit down and maybe play 2 or 3 battles, which the point I'm at, it maybe moves up my experience meter to get to the next level by maybe a third. So it's really
one
slow
battle
going.
or 2 battles.
Like three battles gives me like maybe a third to half of a level.
Those are pretty big maps in that game, right?
Yeah, the maps are big. The levels are long. Like you're going to be, it's, about 20 minutes or so, maybe even longer. But go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm familiar a little with Hyrule Warriors, and they definitely had more like quick play options in there. I think it was kind of an enjoyable little thing. Like the contrivance of it was like the Legend of Zelda original map, and you kind of just unlock tiles and you did quicker fights. But I don't know if they have something of that format for Age of Calamity, or if it's just jump in and do a long form fight again. Maybe it's
they really trimmed down all the different modes in this one. They just kind of focused on the characters, the maps. The story in that game is phenomenal. But you mentioned the camera panning thing with Jedi Fallen Order, and this has a very strange rendering, and it's an issue, but it's probably a limitation done by the Switch, because this game, of course, it's taking something that looks amazing, a game, Breath of the Wild, which, despite the graphical limitations of both the Wii U and the Switch, looks incredible. All the colors that they chose, it looks like you're looking at a very well done, watercolor painting. But when you take that and you try to add all these extra enemies and elements going on, something had to give, I imagine. So when the camera angle changes on you very quickly, like let's say you do a special move and all of a sudden the camera angle changes so that you can now see what's behind you for I want to say the first 1 to 2 frames, if there's something large in the background, it's just not there for a microsecond, and then it suddenly renders. Like, let's say a building is in the background or something off in the distance. If you're looking at it, if you're looking for it, I feel like if anyone who has a discerning eye plays this game, it'll come to them just like that. It did take me probably halfway through the game before I realized, like, oh goodness, that's
so it's like 1 to 2 frames, basically.
Yeah, and the game caps at 30 frames per second. It runs less than that a lot of the times just because of all the enemies on screen. But yeah, it's just, you will be missing large elements whenever that camera cuts away, and it's probably just unavoidable. But I do
kind of like a flicker kind of effect, just that's there.
It's just gone, and then all of a sudden just pops in. But it is quick, but not quite quick enough. So that's what I'm currently playing. But I did just come away from playing Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon on DS, and also, so I completed that because I wanted to get to Fire Emblem Awakening due to the fact that the eShop was closing and I wouldn't get to download all the extra maps for Fire Emblem Awakening. And that game has a strange structure. You have to get to Chapter 4 before you can get to the point where you can even buy the DLC for the game. It's very strange. You can't just jump into the eShop and buy this stuff. So I wanted to play Shadow Dragon first, which is a remake of the original Fire Emblem. Did that. That game is okay. It's classic Fire Emblem, so you have to know how to play those older Fire Emblem titles to not tear all your hair out. Then Fire Emblem Awakening comes along, and it's the first time I've played through it, and I was just, I love that game. Like, all the praise that you've heard about it is completely deserved. It is definitely in the top 10 3DS games ever.
It's definitely overrated, but yeah, sure. No, Fire Emblem Awakening is very good. It does have a strange DLC structure. I don't think I ever bought any of the DLC. So you beat Shadow Dragon, and it was...
Mm-hmm.
Did you have that one? Did you specify if that was through the Wii U, or was that just through its own cartridge?
That was through its own cartridge on the DS.
Okay. Yeah, it's a bit rough looking. Some of the character models blown up on the the screen there because I have it for Wii U. I haven't played it much. I mean, it looks fine, but they just look like little clay people.
Yeah, and I played it on the 3DS where, 3DS has its own upscaling of DS games, and I feel like even if you are playing this on an original DS, just the way they did the sprite work for those battles that you're talking about, it is the only Fire Emblem game that looks this way, and it's almost like a pre-rendered low detail sprite that you're looking at. You can't make out any faces, so it's kind of old school Fire Emblem in that way. But I don't know, the way they have a very fluid movement to them, and they have these idle animations that are not the nicest to look at, but it's what they went with.
Yeah. Again, I haven't played it entirely yet, but I'm sure it will be enjoyable when I get to it. But, when it comes to games, what I really hate about them is feet. And so I was very happy when Fire Emblem Awakening fixed that for me, and they got rid of all the feet. So, yeah. So, yeah, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I actually heard the reason that the feet look the way that they do, and comes from the developers in interviews, they just said that they were developing the game before the 3DS hardware had been finalized, so they had no idea how much horsepower and processing power they would have at their disposal, how much memory, all that stuff. So they were being a bit conservative, some would say too conservative with the character models, and feet were kind of, the thing that got left by the wayside.
That's a funny meeting. Look, Nintendo, your hardware's great, but we just don't know if the 3DS has enough power for that many articulation points, so can't do it. And it's one of those, feature or fault.
Yeah, like, I honestly thought maybe it was an art design choice because,
chibi thing.
Yeah, kind of, because there's a Square Enix artist who draws his art style like everyone looks like Krillin, where they don't have noses. So I thought, okay, so maybe this is just kind of along those lines where no one has feet. But that wasn't it at all.
Is Krillin the one that gets blown up by Frieza?
That would be him.
Oh, there we go. Woo! I get a gold star. I don't know anything about Dragon Ball. Did he not have a nose? I guess he doesn't now that I'm picturing him.
If Charlie Brown were an anime character, Krillin.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
But anyway, yeah, so you've been playing Fire Emblem Awakening. Did you beat it, or are you kind of...
150 or 60 hours later, yeah, I did. I did finally beat it. I just couldn't stop playing it. It was that fun.
Yeah, did you do permadeath, or did you do casual?
I did do permadeaths, yeah. I did do normal. I went normal. I didn't go like hard or lunatic, but yeah.
No, you don't. I've done that game on hard, and I don't know if this is like the game throughout, but unlike there are times when enemies can appear from stairs, and I feel like in normal mode they don't have a move. Like they can't appear and then move. Yeah,
they don't.
Okay, so on hard mode they can.
Oh.
And so you're just like, oh, you murph. Like, just have a flyer there and you're like, well, that sucked. Like, just... So it's one of those things where it's like, that doesn't make the game better. Okay, we're going to, like, keep all our flyers.
Yeah,
we're just going to babysit them in the back till we aggro all these stairs. Like, that doesn't make a game better, so...
Reminds me of the old Ego Raptor cartoon where he's talking about Metal Gear Solid, and he's just like, how was I supposed to know that was going to happen?
Basically. So normal, the game's plenty hard. It'll take you like 40, 50 hours just to do a base playthrough. Honestly, I talk about Zelda. My one brother, he just wants to lead into Fire Emblem Awakening. He loves that game. He's more into the stats. I'm not so much. They're just my murder babies. I like them for their personalities and that they can kill people. Like there's one guy, Vake, in that game, and he's wasn't good for much, and yet he's a squishy boy, and I kept him around anyway. He was a good support with long queue.
I kept him around until the children started coming into it. Then he got rotated out.
I think they call that ageism, but but yeah, like he's just like he can get some health, but he's so slow, and he's like can just take too many hits. So he's good in a support role, but you're kind of eating a slot to do that, and he's got vigor anyway. So since I don't think I ever really bought any of the DLC for that game, though there was plenty of free content that I did indulge myself in. How is the DLC of Fire Emblem Awakening?
It's really good if you want to get a lot of funds. There's basically just one mission that's all about earning lots and lots of gold. There's another mission that's all about experience and like getting a lot of experience in a short amount of time. So grinding purposes, it's really good. I do kind of see through that because it's like you're kind of only making this available through a paywall, so it's almost like not a pay to win, but almost like a pay to make the game, not so much of a grind. So I don't quite like that aspect of it, but there are some other really neat story and story elements that come into play. There's a really good, I want to say it's one of the last packs they put out with, but you basically go to an alternate future timeline, and now you are saving like Lucina and her generation. So
that sounds exciting.
Yeah, that was really neat.
Was that a set of levels or just like?
Yeah, it's like a pack of 3, I think.
That doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, I did give up though when it came to the last DLC. It's I forget the name of it. It's like Apiothis or something like that. It's a weird word.
Everybody knows that word, Apio. Kindergarten.
I'm just a doofus, but it's a set of 5 battles. You don't have to now to get like an actual indication that you beat it. You only have to beat the first one. And it is extremely hard. It's like a very few enemies, but they all have like ridiculous skills. Like they have something called Dragon Skin that completely makes it so that insta kills don't work, and they have like Aegis Plus and Plavice Plus, and like you can't damage them, but they can certainly damage you. They can kill your characters pretty easily. So. And my characters were maxed out, like super maxed out. I'd gotten a whole bunch of skills from other classes that I wanted to, and I was just like, yeah, I'm going to beat this once and call it a day. I'm not going on to the other 4 battles in this set or whatever, but way too tough.
Taste of glory, and then that's good. Yeah.
Yep. Mm. I was like, okay, if I can't. If this is this much of a slug on when I have really maxed out characters with all the best skills in the game, no, I'm good.
Yeah, yeah, again, I didn't really play the DLC. I just kind of did all the spot pass stuff and the paralogs. You could get some really funny-looking character portraits of guys from... they're like classic portraits. I'm like... Oh, yeah. Sure, that's great. Whatever that guy's name is, Clive or something. I'm like, I remember Clive from the remake. Man, he looks like a dum-dum here, but... Yeah,
all the... And you can even get... because the DLC has other portraits of the same characters with different art styles. So it's like some of them look really cool. Some of them look extremely basic and just... like, okay, this looks like a 15-year-old drew it, that kind of a thing. Nothing to, not
only in the best
drawing.
Only in the best way, though. Like, this is a positive.
Absolutely.
This is in the positive column. Yeah.
But it's like this is Nintendo here. Like, come on, like you guys are known for quality and all this stuff, but No, I truly enjoyed it. I enjoyed grinding the characters out and just getting them just where I wanted them with their stats and their skills. And yeah, that final battle after I'd done all the DLC was a cakewalk, but I don't mind that. I actually like when I can do stuff like that.
Well, it's good to, if you're going to have maps where you grind out money and experience, you might as well give the player something to chew on, right?
Right. That's true.
Yeah. See, there's one level, which is probably pretty tame if you played it. It was with this character called Priam. This is like the last paralogue. He's like the son of
Ike, a descendant of Ike.
Someone who's read Homer's Iliad, like my association with Priam comes from other things, but first and foremost, after the fact now. But yeah, Priam, and he's got like 60 guys with him. Oh man, that was a good fight, but I like had to bring in a bunch of my flunkies from Spot Pass because I didn't use them. And I think I lost like 18 people. I'm just like, oh gosh. And I was like, I kind of really enjoyed that.
The way I play Fire Emblem is I don't allow myself to lose anybody. If I lose someone, I start the battle over. That may not be the right way to play, but that's how I do it.
Well, you have your hardcore Spectrum people where it's just like, not at all. Like, you just keep going.
I'm kind of like a pack rat when it comes to party members. I'm like, I might need him for something. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to lose him because something will inevitably be like, oh, you needed to keep so-and-so alive so that you can get this really cool weapon over here. Like, I'm just going to get blindsided like that.
Yeah. For me, it was like, there was this one time where I had Marth from the Amiibo in a future game, and he took out like 3 guys in like the first turn. And then the 4th guy got him. I'm like, honestly, that was so beautiful that maybe I should just keep him dead. But also, it's the first turn, so, I can't really... Like, it's like all... Like, to me, the permadeath is important because it introduces a fail state. Yeah. And you can either choose to, go with that loss, or if that loss is too great, then you have to restart, which is lots of time. And people, when they talk about this stuff, they really don't understand that kind of middle position that both you and I sort of take, where it's like, I want the fail state, but I don't need to lose a guy to one critical unlucky hit either. Like,
right.
It depends how I see it. Like, if I'm like on the last turn and I lose somebody, I'm like, well, that's what it is. But casual, like I've played turn-based games, strategy RPGs. One of them was like Mario versus Rabbids, and I'm just like, I don't really get the real backbone of this game because I was playing that and it was like, oh, I only got good instead of great. Well, I'm going to quit this game forever now. Which actually, like, I did have kind of like strong reactions to that. Oh, only good. But it was like, there was essentially no real anything to it. Like, the only way I'm going to enjoy it is if I'm a perfectionist, because otherwise it feels like you can kind of just brute force your way through anything on casual, which when it came to XP, like, it's interesting because I always thought the XP was kind of its own sort of gameplay currency, where it's like I would like to level my guys up without grinding ever. And there's kind of a way you can do that just within the set missions, and that's what Fire Emblem was, right? Like, it's like there's only so much fresh meat on the market. You better, if you want to level up that potential, you better knock that boss down to 1 hit point and give, the weak pitchfork boy that love tap. And that's kind of it. Like, that's sort of how I play it. So
that was a cool paralogue where you can only recruit, like, I think he's like a villager class. You can only recruit him if he levels up. So you just pair him up with somebody, and hopefully he stays alive.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, Fire Emblem Awakening, that's a pretty solid game all around. There are, with all games, there's like, oh, the sequels do it better in this way, but then they don't get this one other aspect right. I feel like Awakening is just a solid all-around game.
Yeah.
Like, I think the pairing system is kind of broken in that game, and they sort of made it more of an interesting dichotomy in the Fates games, which people kind of talk those games down, but I don't know. I really enjoy them. I'll happily pay $20 for DLC if it's an entirely new campaign. That's not... Nintendo's allowed to do that. I mean, if they put that much work into their DLC, it's like, oh, they're just trying to make money. I'm like, well, ultimately, all video games are trying to do that. So if they justify it, then I'm fine with it, and they did. So, but Fates, they took the pairing system and they sort of made a dichotomy between defense and offense, whereas Awakening's just like, well, you might as well pair everybody up.
Right. Yeah, there's no downside.
Yeah, you're kind of losing certain unit moves, but like essentially the way the maps are based is like, yeah, they're just going to crash into you and break like water on the rocks. So.
Yeah, although I was trying to organically figure out who could actually progress in a relationship. Yeah. Just by pairing people together and being like, okay, they're not, when they do something together, they don't get that little heart over their head. And then I realized later that you can actually look up who's compatible with who.
Yeah, it's like...
And
look for the S.
I thought, oh, yeah. You'll see like little CBA letters next to their names. And you're like, oh, okay. Priam just hates everybody except Robin. That makes sense.
I don't think I ever... I think I just... Did I even recruit Priam? Maybe I just stopped the game there.
I actually made him a member of my party once I got him. He was so late game though, but I was just like, man, if it's anyone related to Marth, Ike, or Roy, I just have to have them in there.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
It's the Smash Brothers in me.
I had all the amiibo, so I had a big sword party. I'm like, this is imbalanced.
Does Awakening do amiibo?
No, the other ones do.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, it's very good amiibo support, like, very good.
Yeah. And I have Marth and Ike amiibo.
But I guess in Awakening you can just get them, so it's like...
yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, Awakening's cool, definitely. Probably should stop talking about it, because it could just...
it would take over.
Could just go. I'm gonna close that box on Pandora. Enough, Steven.
You know what I was doing.
Trying to trap me with this bear trap of Fire Emblem Awakening. Yeah, that's
my plan's
any other
outed.
games you've been playing. You only have a minute to talk about them, if you do.
No, that was it.
Okay, yeah. All right. Well, that yeah. So, with what we've been playing out of the way, we are... You know what? I think we'll go to a music break, because it's been a while, and then when we come back, we have one more topic, and then probably another music break, and then we'll go on to our review. Yeah. So, let's go to break. Okay, welcome back. Before we move into our review portion of the show, we have one topic left. It's going to be a short one, I promise. No digressions. It'll be over in a 15-minute time window. Hopefully. Probably. Maybe. Okay, so I I don't know how familiar you are with the N64 library, Stephen. Perhaps you'd like to fill me in specifically. How deep have you delved into the N64 mine?
Racing games as far as the eye can see.
Racing game utopia, yeah. That's definitely true. Some good ones, certainly. So I've heard. And some, well, I don't know. Do you ever play Star Wars Episode 1 Racer?
Yeah, I did play that. My when the N64 was popular, I had the PS1 and my neighbor had the N64, and so we would rent games that the other one would want to try out, and that was one that I did want to try out, and I thought that was so cool that they had the track at Mos Espa pretty much be exactly what the track was in the movie. Like, the layout is, for all intents and purposes, 1-to-1. So that was pretty neat back then to see that.
Yeah, I feel like you must be talking about the last track of because it's like, there's like a basic track of Mos Espa, and then like one that's like there's like a much longer version, which I was like, oh, I'm glad, because I feel like if the thing that I recognize from the movie is just the first basic level, that's unexciting. I will say the Dreamcast version, which I think is the one that I was playing with my brother briefly on the Xbox One that they released, is probably the better version. Because there's like sound they had to cut. But this is not a Star Wars Episode 1 racer topic. But mostly your experience with it, you're saying a lot of racers and of course some notable first-party Nintendo games like... Oh, crap. I feel like I couldn't think of any joke answer. Never mind. Notable first-party Nintendo games. Dr. Mario for the N64. Classic.
Yeah, Glover was amazing.
I love Glover. It's so great. Anyway, yeah, so I own maybe 47, 48 games for the N64 across a couple different consoles. Probably have like 28, 29 for the actual hardware, which is for the N64. You want to play it on original hardware. That joystick does not emulate well. Let me tell you, on the Wii U, just ugh. And then, shockingly, Xbox's N64 lineup of the games they have, it's not bad either. So you pick up Rare Replay, you're pretty much getting a pretty good chunk of the N64 lineup. But of those games, I'm about 30 in, and you know, I've heard famously that the back end, like the development work for the N64, was a little little complex. I'm sure the PS1 was also its own proprietary thing to work out. But you know, PS1 had discs, so you know, right. 700 megabytes of playground, a 700 megabyte playground to work with. Definitely had that going for it, but yeah, the N64, it's not... I'm of the opinion that developers be damned. As long as they make a great game, I don't care about their problems. Their problems can stay their problems as long as it comes out as a good product. But as I've been playing N64 games, and again, I'm pretty deep into it, there's 397 games total, I think, across Japan and America, but 200 of those are licensed stuff of varying quality or annualized sports titles. It's like, I think...
Yeah, it's one of the smallest libraries for a system that was around for, 5 years.
Yeah, Saturn had like... How much did Saturn have? Like 600, I think? I think the Sega Saturn had more than the N64, and that was like a...
Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, anyway, like 393 in the States sounds big, but I mean, it wasn't that big, and I'd say from moseying around on the internet, I'd say there's really only like 60 games that are like potentially worth anything, And I am omnipotent, so there's no errors I'm making with that, but yeah, so When it comes to this library that I played, there are just some strange problems. And they're not necessarily hardware problems, but it's like design problems. And it's like these kind of design problems, I already mentioned them with the rare stuff, but they are so glaring. One of the big ones is that in the N64 world, every game... Now I'm a slower gamer, but like I play games slower. But like, let's say every game needs to be about 25 hours long, it seems. And with the N64, they didn't always have the content to justify 25 hours. So they would do some pretty shisty things. I was playing The World Is Not Enough, 007, on the N64. And they did this wonderful thing to me where they put one hostage in the game at the tail end of the level, and they put him in and it's like, oh, if you shoot a hostage, you fail. It's not like GoldenEye where you can shoot one or two, like real life. The first one's free. That's the law. But yeah, one hostage, you kill one hostage, the mission fails. And they put this hostage in a dimly lit room. And I pull that trigger, and his hands aren't in hostage. They're not locked in the hands up. I see his hands go up as I squeeze that trigger, squeeze that round off, and he's dead. And I'm like, oh, great. There's no checkpoints. I have to do this entire level. I'm using all my good church words. And I'm like, I don't know why. I'm like, I knew if I met that developer, I would shout in their face. Not shout, but I'd give him a good rinse, because there's no reason that stuff is justifiable. And I think about these sort of practices that are just really common in the N64. Rare's shooters, very much the same way, where it's just like, there's this instance in GoldenEye and Perfect Dark where it's just like, in a game where you can retrieve things off the ground, like, oh, I picked up a gun off the ground. For some reason, if you plant a bug, like some sort of tech on the side of the wall where you're not supposed to, it's like, oh, mission failed. You planted that the wrong way. It's like, yeah, I can't just retrieve it from that wall. And like, I can't. Anyway, these things, I don't know what you think, but there's no realm where these are justifiable. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, the Nintendo developers, or N64 developers, third-party developers, whatever, they just had a mandate where it's like, this game's got to be at least 20 hours long because the kid's paying $70 for it or whatever. And, famously, N64 cartridges like Turok, and they'd go for like 70 then.
Yeah.
Like WrestleMania 2000, famously, $100? Not that I played that game, but that's much. Wow. Yeah, it was something absurd. You got to pay for that storage, but really, I think the point I'm getting to is like, I think either through intentional shystiness or just through overlooking things, design overlooks. I think these are probably the inadvertent result of the fact that their development time was very constrained. These people, like, they probably spent a lot of times just making something functional. If this N64 hardware is so complicated to develop for, as I've heard it is. So they got it running, put it together, and then they shipped it out with what little time to polish they had left. I'm going to get into some specifics, but what do you think about that theory, that working theory?
Yeah, the cartridge limitations were really a big headache for a lot of developers back then. The controller, of course, didn't make things really any better, but there were a lot of... It was a hard time for third parties to really work with Nintendo, and which was completely opposite of how it was during the Super Nintendo era. Like, it just seemed like if there was a third-party game on a 16-bit system, you can bet that there was going to be some version of it on the Super Nintendo. When it came to this fifth generation with N64, PS1, and Saturn, it just was... You were going to see it on the PlayStation, almost no doubt. And then if the N64 did get an exclusive third party, you tended to end up with something like Superman, and it would just be a complete and total disaster. I don't know. It's so weird because I feel like the late 90s was such a breakneck pace for how quickly technology was changing. I mean, people were starting to really get the internet around that time in their homes, and that's the time that I did. So it was really, everything was changing a lot, and that of course also affected the video games with their move from 2D to 3D. A lot of developers said just moving from 2D to 3D was a massive hurdle. So working with the constraints of a maybe 64 megabyte cartridge compared to a 700 megabyte disc was kind of going to make you think, okay, well, now we have to be very clever. We can do what Nintendo did with Super Mario 64 and just kind of make the same levels, but change them slightly so that you've all of a sudden got a new level, wink, wink. Or we can try and squeeze everything into it, and it just, I don't know, I think that was probably the Achilles heel for it. And then they were going to solve it with the disk drive, but we never got it because it didn't sell well enough in Japan for it to warrant an international release. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot.
I feel like I don't know about enough about the disk drive, but I'm not a big Sega guy, but I know about their infamous editions on the Genesis, and I feel like I'm just sort of primed to be like, I'm not sure add-ons are ever a good idea, so maybe Nintendo made the right call with that. Never got that F-Zero X editor, or Zelda. Yeah, Zelda Gaiden or Zelda Eura, whatever the word was. So I have some. I mentioned The World Is Not Enough. I don't know if you're familiar with that James Bond movie, but stars Denise Richards. So in the same way that she is a nuclear physicist, I am a tech guy. So this could be a little painful, but I had some specifics, which the internet is not very helpful with Nintendo 64 specifics. It's either it's explained in a simplified 5-year-old way, or it's explained to someone who's looking to emulate N64 games. Which it's like, oh, well, I could take 2 years of programming and maybe understand that. but I have some stuff here. So the N64 came out at like $200, which is actually a pretty reasonable price. I don't know what the PS1 was. Similar, or maybe $150. But it was like, at the time, it was like, in theory, like very powerful. With the reality coprocessor and such. And it had this... it also had this, I don't know what you call it. It's like a memory. I think it's memory. It's like a Rambus, whatever, anyway, see, I'm already stumbling here, but it had like it had fast transfer speeds, or it could transfer a lot of things through I think it was just called the Rambus. Like, it had a lot of high-tech stuff, but then famously it had like a 4 kilobyte texture pack in its either in its coprocessor or in the CPU itself. I think it was in the coprocessor, the reality coprocessor, the RSP. And that famously was not a lot of space. You could break up tiles if you wanted to, or you could make them smaller, and if they were smaller, then they'd stretch and be low texture, famously. That N64 famous kind of look that I think in a previous episode you mentioned. It's like, a lot of these games kind of look the same. And it's like, maybe it has something to do with that. Like, just sort of a famous low texture kind of blurry thing, as compared to Metal Gear Solid on the PS1. A lot of good texture work in that game. You're not going to see that on the N64. But hypothetically, this coprocessor was like more powerful than PCs on the market. But the problem this thing had, the RD RAM, so it had a good Rambus or whatever, which could run like 520 millibytes per second or whatever. That was the transfer speed, but it had latency issues, which means that it could load in a lot of stuff, but specifically with graphics. But the delay on that time, like the latency was like earlier models, they were saying 10 to 30 seconds. They could take the cartridge out, and this is where this gets a bit above my head. It would like take like 10, 30 seconds for the RAM banks to clear or something like that, even after the cartridge was out. Like, it was slow. And so basically, yeah, they just couldn't render stuff that quickly. And so apparently a lot of developers, they had to work on like keeping things constantly rendering in, which I'm sure the PS1 developers had a similar thing to do. But because of the latency, this is where it gets kind of the thing that was the big hurdle, is basically because the TMEM, which I don't know what that means, but it's essentially the memory, the 4 kilobyte memory, because they just had no storage for that. A lot of them were reading memory directly off the cart itself, rather than going through the through the CPU or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, but that was, I think a lot of that work just went into that, because basically, yeah, like it was a system. The way I've heard it said is it's a 64-bit system in theory, but because of these how long it takes to actually start rendering stuff in, like for these commands to basically, the commands just take so long to jump between one thing and the other, the RSP and the RCP or whatever. You just can't do 64-bit commands like at all. It's too much work. And there was this thing called microcoding, which Nintendo could do, where basically you could make shortcuts. I'm not sure how much of this is familiar, but apparently they didn't just give that out to anybody. You had to like develop for them for a while. And so if you're like Factor 5, like they apparently got microcode and they ended up making their own code off it, which is why that game Rogue Squadron looks really good. Even to this day.
Could be wrong.
Yeah.
I've been saying this, but I think Rare was also like one of the other within the small circle of trusted developers to
that would make sense. But even then, like, what they were talking about, something called like fill rate. And I think that had something to do with rendering and like MIPS or whatever, which... do you know what a MIP is? Because I forgot.
I just remember MIPS was the name of the processor, the main processor of the system.
I think that's part of it.
It stands for something, but...
I think it has something to do with like distance rendering, where you like render in like a rough shape of something instead of the... There's one thing I didn't look up, but... Anyway... As I said, Denise Richards here. I'm not a tech person, but it is interesting thinking about, like, you know, if you're a big fanboy, it's like, oh, PS1 was 32-bit and the N64 was 64-bit, but like, because of like just this issue in like loading data and the fact that unless you had microcode, it was a 32-bit system, like in practice. I don't know if anything I've said has made sense, and if it has or hasn't, either way, would you like to contribute?
Only really that MIPS with the N64 stands for microprocessor without interlocked pipeline stages. And it's also the assembly language that you could code on. So, both.
Yeah, so basically, I don't, like, again, like, I would feel, my theory is, like, with how much of a headache and overhead it is just to get anything running, or, like, you know, fussing with this, I really think that these developers didn't have time to make a lot of content, or they couldn't make a lot of content, because they couldn't really render in too much space, though I get confused, because I've heard that N64 games are faster, like they're kind of more gameplay centric than PS4 games, but then I'm also hearing that they're slower in, I guess maybe in like environment language, like they just can't load stuff in. But I thought the N64 it gets confusing because apparently the N64 had a greater draw distance than the PS1.
Probably, yeah.
But then it's also famous for fog, so I'm like,
right, which PS1 would use in some of its games. Another difference was the PS1 could draw a lot more polygons than the N64 could.
It's probably that latency thing and storage for one.
Right.
And yeah, it is. And I'm a Nintendo fan to the core, so anything to get on over the PS1, I'll take it. Like, just no chill whatsoever. But I mean, it's a funny thing. Like, there's that famous quote I have written down somewhere by Genyo Takeda, who was, the main architect of the N64 and the Wii and probably the GameCube. He said something along the lines, he's like, well, when we started the N64, we were focused. This is what's the word? A paraphrase. He's like, we were focused on peak power. And then he's like, well, we've learned that cruise speed is what's most important, which is probably a good way to put it. Because, yeah, this thing apparently, hypothetically, in the hypothetical world of Doctor Strange, one of those universes, the N64 was super powerful, but it just had some really funny bottlenecks.
Yep.
Its unified memory was, I think, very forward-thinking, but I guess it wasn't big enough. If you made the graphics too nice, then the music would have to be real compressed in smaller data files, something like that.
Yeah, a lot of N64 games went the MIDI route, where it wasn't actual digitized music. It was just, okay, here's a set of instruments, and we're just going to basically make it like Mario Paint, where you are just programming music in for the sound card to execute. So,
you said MIDI? Is that different from MEDI, or is it the same?
MIDI is like the acronym.
And is there an MEDI? Is that another acronym? Because I thought Twilight Princess was using MIDI or MEDI.
I think
also.
Well, it did actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we talked about that.
Yeah, and I think it stands for some. I could be wrong, but I think it's musical instrument digital interface or something like that.
Yeah, it's not like real capture.
Yeah, it's synthesized sound.
There are some soundtracks that are very good, and I'm not really going to get into those because it's a little tangential to the conversation. And for Super Mario 64, when it came to that game, I don't know if that game is what you'd call good looking. I'm very divided on that. I'm like, I mean, in a way, it's kind of interesting looking, but that game used what they called, I butcher the pronunciation of this, Gerard shading a lot, where it's you essentially take a tile and you move it to a different position, and because of the lighting difference, it essentially creates a shade variance. And so you can effectively create different shaders and or models, colors, different colorings with one tile. It's very complicated, and they have lots of tutorials on it on the internet, but that's how they got around, and probably a lot of developers got around these what do you call it, it's storage limitations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nintendo is really, really good at working around the limitations of their hardware. Even Super Mario Brothers is kind of, as people dig further into that game, they're realizing just how compressed that it was, and that even from that early on in that console's life, it's technically pushing it to its limits. Of course, you can look at the later Super Mario games and think, well, those look graphically better, but just how they were able to make everything fit into the cartridge limitations even then, because with any system, cartridge limitations tend to go up as the console gets older. Just they find, just like with any storage capacity, you tend to get larger and larger variations of the same form factor. So, yeah, they're super good at they know their hardware and they know how to work around the limitations. It's just a matter of, are they sharing that with others or not?
Absolutely not. I gotta enter an exclusive deal. It's just I don't know. I hope someone found this little tech corner interesting because, like, I don't know. I've tried to fit this stuff in and, like, gosh, I looked at the coprocessor and I'm like, I can't make heads or tails of that.
I, too, enjoy watching Modern Vintage Gamer and imagine that I can understand what he's saying.
That's how I brushed up on some of this. But you are certainly more familiar with the PS1 than I am, so is there any interesting tidbits about that system's limitations that you would want to bring up to draw any sort of meaningful comparison, perhaps?
Well, I brought up the whole music thing and MIDI, and as good as you kind of had to pick your strengths when it came to PS1, because even though you could have 1 CD games, 2 CD games, up to 4 CD games on that system, maybe even more, but I'm just thinking like the later Final Fantasy games on that system used 4 CDs. But even those games couldn't do digitized music, like they had to do synthesized music using the sound card in there. It was all MIDI. And then because they were using that space for the cinematics, for the pre-rendered movie files.
Yeah.
So you even with the larger capacity, you really couldn't. You kind of had to pick whether or not you were going to have voice acting or digitized music, or you were going to have these full motion video files. You couldn't really go with all three, or maybe you had a little bit of each one.
Yeah, I imagine both systems were very proprietary, and the Saturn was its own unique beast in that it had like 2 processors that were like to like beef up its power, but they weren't necessarily like. And
they just threw one of those.
Being used.
They just threw one of those in the last minute because they didn't want to be inferior.
That Panzer Dragoon game though, that game's cool looking. I'll give them that.
It does look neat.
Like they did a remake of it, and it's like, oh, it's kind of missing the point.
Agreed.
I mean, obviously you can't make a game that looks exactly like that crazy water effect they did for that game, and that is the interesting thing about these games, is sometimes there's sort of a surreal element to them, so it makes it hard for me to be like, graphically I don't really know how to appraise this, but some games do look bad, certainly. You can say that outright, but others, famously, like which has come up, is the water effect in the Water Temple where you fight Shadow Link. How they made that happen, like it's like using a rock texture and then like fixing it with effects, and then like those effects didn't carry over in the emulator for the Switch or the Wii U. Yeah. So there's like, oh gosh, like wow, that's some stuff.
Like what? I thought you guys all didn't like fog. Now the fog is gone.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we'll get into that when we talk about our review game, but kind of close out the conversation really. Again, people talk about the limited storage on the GameCube. In the grand scheme of things, taking out a disc and inserting disc 2 wasn't always great, but for the GameCube, I find like that stuff really, it's yet to matter. It's like, oh, well, must be a headache for the developer, but I'm selfish, so I don't care. The game's still good, I'm sure. And, of course, like, texture work was probably less than, Xbox. There was obvious drawbacks, but the GameCube was a pretty powerful system at the time, so whatever. As for this N64, though, I'm thinking a lot of these weird, messy design choices. Messy or vindictive sometimes, which they're not. The vindictive ones might be unrelated or related, inadvertently related, but I think a lot of that probably comes down to the fact that this thing was, a bit of a pain to develop for, Unless you're Nintendo and, you have the keys to the kingdom. Like, I would say, don't want to get into it too much, but like, of the first party games on the Nintendo, prior to doing this show, I think I played like 9 or 10 of them, and they were all first party, and it gives you a pretty rosy view of the N64 when you're playing Star Fox and Ocarina and Majora's Mask, and Mario Kart 64 too is pretty good. Wave Race too. Wave Race is pretty cool. And those water effects are still good looking today. They don't look real, but they look surreal. But that's Nintendo, and you get beyond that, and all of a sudden it's not as... All of a sudden the development looks a little more shaky. Any final thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yeah, I just think that the library size is really all the indication you need to let you know just whether it was hardware related or not, how difficult it was for anyone to make a Nintendo 64 game.
For sure, yeah. Okay, so now that that's all said, we are going to go to a final break, and then when we come back, we're going to do a review. So, stay tuned for that.